What's up, guys? Brett Okamoto alongside UFC lightweight Michael Chandler, who we are one day removed from the announcement of his fight, UFC 314, Miami, Florida. He's taking on Paddy Pimblett. Um, Michael, it's not like this fight came out of nowhere. We've been sort of, this rumor has been percolating. I think Paddy has obviously put out some hints towards this could be the fight. You've been answering questions about it, but then it does sound like the timing of it, the date of it, actually came up not out of left field, but just it wasn't this long drawn up thing where you knew about it months ahead. So just kind of tell me how this fight came together.
Yeah, it's a good question. Man, it was, we were talking June, we were talking, then there was a little talks about Miami, then we were talking June again. We kind of bounced back and forth. I think, for me, I'm always training, I'm always staying in shape. After the last fight, I needed a little bit of time to heal up a couple little things. So that was a little bit new to me, but I'm always staying in shape. Did a little rehab, PT stuff, and then doing as much as I possibly can to stay in shape, eating clean, because I do want to bounce back from this last fight, and have some great opportunities. And I'm never waiting again. I want to be fast. I mean, I fought 6 fights in 13 months early in my career. Since I signed with the organization, the first 2 years I fought, like, what was it, 4 or 5 fights, fight of the year, fight of the night. I mean, I'm an active guy. I like to stay active. My body responds well and can handle the brutalities of the sport. So, it was a game time decision, kind of, but I got the call. Hunter said April. I said, give me a second to think about it. I flew to Vegas the next day, um, spent some time with the PI people, did a couple little assessments, evaluations, sat in Hunter's office, sat down for an hour or two, and then we made the decision.
That was going to be my question because you came out on YouTube and you had mentioned that you talked to Hunter and then you flew out here. Why? Like, what did you have to check and what conversations did you have to have?
So I actually already had a scheduled meeting to go meet the UFC, Dr. Davidson, and the UFC PI to kind of do some assessments, both nutritionally and physically. Saw Heather there at UFC PI, and it was already actually kind of scheduled. And then prior, I got the call, and I'm like, "Well, I'll be there on Sunday, so that's 2 days from now. So I'll see you out there." And then did some evaluations and had some good conversations. And Hunter had meetings all day, and he said, "Hey, meet me at my office at 6:30." And then met him at the office at 6:30. We sat down for a little while, broke some bread, and here we are.
And part of that meeting is that he confided in you what is going on with the lightweight division, probably gave you some insight into where you fit in it. I was just texting Hunter this morning. He said, make sure that Mike knows that I give him full permission to go ahead and just tell him everything that we spoke about. So
That
if
is
you just
not
want to,
true,
if you just
dude.
want to let us know
Bro, for a
what is
second.
happening in the lightweight division
Oh
this
my God, for
summer,
a second,
go
dude,
ahead.
you almost got me. I'm like, this doesn't seem right. There's a lot that I think, I mean, well, first of all, I woke up this morning to the announcement. I missed Dana's announcement last night. I was already sleeping, so I woke up to the barrage of holy cow, the fights happening and all that stuff. Um, but what else was announced? Volkanovski versus Diego is fighting for the light or the featherweight title because Topuria has now vacated. Obviously,
Yep.
there's a tons of rumors out there that Topuria is going to fight Islam. Um, who knows, man? Like, there's, I have some good conversations, and there's some big possibilities going on out there, and so far everything I've been told has come to fruition as far as what has been announced currently. So, we'll see. I mean, all I know is I am very blessed and fortunate to be in the coolest, the funnest, the most violent, the most exciting division in the UFC, in the entire world. And now you got Ilia Topuria jumping into the mix. We just had Max Holloway jump into the mix. I mean, it's the who's who. It's the coolest division to be a part of. And now I get an opportunity to fight a guy that I love the matchup. And he's a big star. Like, people like him. I'm a fan of Paddy. If you're not a fan of Paddy, like, he's a fun guy to watch, both inside the octagon, outside of the octagon. He and I have been very cordial over the years, and now I'm excited to go out there and compete against him.
Yeah, I'm excited too, and I want to get to the fight, of course. As far as the division, I think you know more than you're letting on, but that's fine. I
I
get it.
definitely know a lot. I know a lot more than I'm letting on, and I'm very fortunate. And the reason I know a lot more than I'm letting on is because I am a reliable steel trap who thinks just as much about the whole picture and my promoters, my promotion, my bosses, my employers as much as I think about myself. And sometimes guys don't do that, and it always bites them in the bottom. So we're gonna keep it tight-lipped, but you guys will know soon.
Well, that's fine. We'll talk about it off camera, and then you can fill me all in. Well, the one thing I will ask you though is like, did you get some good clarity in terms of because after your last fight, one of the best things, or not best, but one of the most insightful things, I love hearing these like real things, and you shared that you went to the hotel room with your wife and you cried and you said that might be my last shot. That might be the last shot at getting, I'm going to be in big fights, but title eliminators, title shots. So having sit down and talk with Hunter, and I'm sure you're looking at it through your lens and what your career looks like in the next, few years. Do you still feel that way? Like, what kind of clarity did you walk away with in terms of just your own personal career?
I mean, right after the fight, man, there's so fighting for a UFC title is like catching lightning in a bottle in a lot of ways, man. I mean, you got guys who fight years and years and years and don't get an opportunity to fight for the title. And I knew this one was a clear-cut number one contender fight, and all I had to do was beat Charles Oliveira, right? And I think the pain and the disappointment that I was dealing with right after the fight had so much to do with how high I was on believing that I was going to beat Charles Oliveira. That this was the way it was supposed to be planned. This is the way it was supposed to be scripted. Come into the UFC, lose to Charles Oliveira the first time, to then get the opportunity to beat Charles Oliveira, to then go fight Islam for the title or whoever holds the title. I just truly believed that that was what was going to happen. And it just did not work out, obviously. And there's the pain of like, hey man, maybe you're just not good enough. There's the pain of, hey, this was probably your last shot, you might not ever get another shot. But this is the what have you done for me lately business, and the best thing I can do is stay active. The worst thing I can do is sit around and stew and say, okay, I'm going to wait till the summer, wait till the fall. No, I want to get right back in the mix. I want to be in exciting big fights to where I remind the UFC, I remind the fans, I remind myself, I remind the entire MMA community who I am and what I do, and what it feels like when I step inside the octagon. So fought in November, now I'm going to fight again in April. I'm going to be fresh on everybody's mind going into the summer. Um, and my conversations with the UFC have always been great. There's no doubt that we are in a mutually beneficial, symbiotic win-win scenario. I do the best I can inside and outside of the octagon. They have done nothing but be 100% honest with me at all times, have come through with every single thing that they have said. Um, and that still rings true to today. So you're always one fight away. When you're in that top UFC top 10, you're always one fight away, a big fight away, doing something spectacular. And I plan on doing something spectacular April 12th. And we'll see what happens this summer.
Where did you land on the "Am I good enough" conversation? I mean, and I love it that you can sit here and talk and have these honest conversations. It's like you did lose to the guy twice now,
Yeah.
and so where do you land when you start to question like, well, I don't know, am I good enough to be the absolute best? Like I'm good enough to be in the top five, I can see that, but am I good enough to be the best? How did that conversation go in your head?
Yeah, man, it was ups and it's downs because there's a lot of different ways you could look at it. I mean, you could look at my record in the UFC and say, man, you're 2-4 in the UFC, but I have lost to Charles Oliveira, UFC champion, Dustin Poirier, interim champion, and who fought for the title now 3 times, Justin Gaethje, interim champion, one fight away from fighting for the title, and I think could win the title. Those are my 3 losses in the UFC. I am fighting first ballot Hall of Famers, some of the best to ever do it. Those are the guys who I have lost to. So now we get an opportunity to go fight a guy who's not those guys, right? So let's go see how I stack up. Let's go see what I put together. No, not to mention I did beat Dan Hooker, who is now the number 4, number 5 guy in the country or the world right now. Tony Ferguson. So I mean, where I landed is I love this sport. I love what I get to do. I am proud of myself for what I have done and what I have accomplished. And I know I haven't won every fight, but I can promise you I have prepared as well as I possibly could for each fight. And really in life, the wins and the losses are going to sometimes be out of your control. All you can control is winning the day and preparing every day. And I do that like no other. So I'm proud of what I have done thus far. But um, as you can see by me taking this fight, as you can see by me wanting to get back in there, being in a hurry to get back in there, I'm still extremely hungry. I had a great training camp last camp. was extremely confident. So I plan on doing that again the next 8 weeks against Paddy Pimblett, and showing up April 12th in Miami, knocking his block off, doing a couple backflips, ripping off a promo, and I'm going to remind the UFC world, the UFC fans, why I deserve to be in the top discussion.
Let's talk about Paddy Pimblett, and let's. I don't want the polished answer. I don't want the how good is he? Like,
Mm.
he has a track record now in the UFC, but he has not faced the top level of competition. But you are a smart guy. You have the eye test. You can make some presumptions, right?
Yep.
How good is he?
How good is he? I think he's got great belief in himself, which is, I think, the most important thing in this sport. When it comes to physical attributes, power in his hands, ability to finish a fight at all times, great in all positions. I don't think he's there in a lot of ways. I believe I'm going to put a pressure on him. I believe he will know right away within the first exchange he's not stepping into the octagon with Bobby Green, with Tony Ferguson, with some of these guys that he has fought. It's just a different level, and I still believe where I'm at. It's a bad matchup stylistically for him. That first time he gets hit by one of the toughest punchers in the UFC lightweight division, which he has not faced yet, it's going to be a different feeling. It's going to be a different speed. It's going to be a different ferocity that he hasn't felt before. And as said, I think Patty's still got a bright future. I think Patty will always be a fan favorite, but I do believe he's got some momentum right now, and the Patty train stops in Miami, and he's going to have to go back to the drawing board. And he's great, great dude, and but I plan on landing some big punches and finishing him early.
I love the fact that you talked about right off the bat how confident he is, because I think that's a weapon of his as well. He has gone through adversity. Have you studied his fights enough to know or kind of sense how he deals with adversity when it's brought to him in the cage in competition? Have you watched that?
Yeah, yeah, obviously his UFC debut, he got dropped, and had some adversity there and was able to come back. I think the Jared Gordon fight, I don't know where you stand on it. I think he lost that fight. I do think he was fading in the Tony Ferguson fight, and now he's locked into the cage for 25 minutes against one of the most ferocious guys in the lightweight division. I can fight 50 minutes, let alone 25 minutes. I just fought Charles Oliveira, one of the greatest to ever do it, for 25 minutes at Madison Square Garden. So these are going to be deep waters that he's never been in before. I was talking to Henry Hoof, my coach, and he's like, Michael, you fought more 25-minute 5-round fights than this guy has fights. And it is true. All of my fights in Bellator, or the majority of my fights in Bellator, I was training for 5-round title fights. And now I've trained for 5 rounds. This is my third or fourth time training for a 5-round fight in the UFC. Man, I'm comfortable in the deep waters. I prepare perfectly, and it's going to be a whole different ball game when you're locked in there for 25 minutes.
I know you're going to prepare well because you prepare well when you don't have a fight. I mean, everybody knows that. You have like people make memes about you living in the
Yeah.
gym, you know?
Yeah.
But this fact that like you are going to someone you've kind of mentioned it, I think you even phrased it as like an easier day in the office or something.
Yeah.
Um, is that something you have to be aware of like even your own mindset of like, don't take this guy lightly, don't take this guy lightly. Like he's not Dustin Poirier, he's not Justin Gaethje, but maybe, and you said he'll go on to have like a great career. So is that something you almost got to keep in mind? Like, I guess, how do you approach that when you're like you jump from such a class of guys to then this class of guy that arguably just hasn't proven it, isn't there, doesn't have the track record.
It's a great question, and I think that is the greatest form of weakness, when it comes to the human condition, where there is somewhat of a lighter load or a lighter burden to bear, or a lesser path, or a path to a lesser goal that you would give less than your best. Man, I spent how many years in Bellator fighting guys that are no longer fighting guys that never made it to stardom, fighting guys who, a lot of people in the mixed martial arts world, unless you were a diehard mixed martial arts fan, didn't really realize who they were or how good they were. And a lot of those guys were good, right? I think it's in some senses harder to fight a guy, who's more less dangerous, who's a little bit more susceptible than there is to go to fight your Poiriers and your Gaethjes and your Oliveras and those guys where you're, you know, it's I've what I'm trying to get at is I've never given less than 100% of myself, and that's
Mhm.
what I've always said. I said that with my first conversation I had with Dana when I was talking about fighting and coming over to the UFC, and they were kind of wooing me and saying, "Hey, we want to sign you." It was like, man, I've spent so long outside of the UFC, and I trained for Brandon Gertz or Dave Rickles or one of these guys years ago, like I was
Mhm.
training for Benson Henderson when he was UFC champion, Anthony Pettis when he was UFC champion, Frankie Edgar, Khabib, Connor, when these guys were champions. I trained just as hard against those guys that a lot of people didn't know as if I was training to become or fighting to become the number one guy in the world. So the preparation is the exact same. It doesn't matter who the opponent is. I'm really fighting against myself. Has nothing to do with Paddy Pimblett. Doesn't have anything to do with the last 30 guys that I've fought. It's always against yourself. And I'm going to prepare perfectly. I'm going to show up on April 12th and shock the world.
I got two more questions for you. Have you seen the betting odds for it? I know it was just announced last night, and I was kind of asking around. It's up on DraftKings. Do you know what it opened?
I don't know.
Minus 110, minus 110. That's
What is that?
pick 'em.
Dead even?
Pick 'em. Dead even,
All right.
50-50.
All right.
What is
Well,
your reaction?
bet
What's your
on
reaction to
Chandler.
that?
Uh, I don't know, man. I'm not a big betting odds guy. Betting odds, betting. I don't bet on. Well, obviously, I can't bet on fights, but I don't bet on sports in general. Um, Man, I've been the underdog in I think every fight that I've had. Maybe Ferguson, I was a favorite, but I've been the betting underdog every single fight thus far. So it doesn't surprise me that I'm even against Paddy right now. But I think the smart money is going to come in on Chandler, and those odds are going to change here pretty soon.
I'm surprised, man. And this is
Yeah,
absolutely nothing against Patty. Like I pride myself on being unbiased. Like I don't want to, it's just because of the different lack of the different level of competition. And like you said, it wasn't that long ago that people were like, "Hey, I think he lost to Jared." So
yeah,
I am very surprised that it's even.
yeah. No, I think it's definitely a little bit interesting, and like you said, man, it's all about strength and schedule, man. You can, and this sport is so interesting in the fact that it's like I feel like any of us can beat any of us on any given night, right? Especially when you're talking about a lot of these top guys. Doesn't matter if you're 1,001 favorite, 1,001 underdog. Anybody can lose and anybody can win. It's a crazy sport. With that being said, yeah, I mean, you look at the strength of schedule, man, and nobody knows how I feel besides myself. Nobody knows how hard I actually train out when the cameras aren't around and the
Mhm.
decisions I make whenever the when I'm away from the public eye and the cameras on around, but I know I do. And I know the life that I live and I know how I train. And I'm not saying that he doesn't. I'm just saying I do it better than anybody else in the sport. So I know I will be prepared on April 12th. And I've been prepared for April 12th since November 16th or whatever it was when I lost to Oliveira. And I was like, man, I'm getting back in there as soon as I possibly can. I'm gonna right this wrong. And I think Patty's the perfect opportunity to take it against.
Yep. Last one. I don't always ask fighters for prediction. I think it's kind of like sometimes it makes sense and sometimes it doesn't. For me, this one it makes sense because I know that you like to study film. I know that you're very familiar with his style. I know that you're very hungry coming off of that fight against Charles Oliveira. Do you have a feeling in terms of how you win this fight?
Yeah, I mean, I truly believe, as I've said, I don't think he's ever been hit by anybody, even in the same stratosphere as me. And there's a lot of things that are daggers in my side and my stomach from that last fight against Charles. But I did show a lot of shades of some maturity and a little bit of veteranship, a little bit of, as I said, trying to win by one instead of trying to win by 1,000. To where I'm going to put a pace on Patty and pressure on Patty like he's never felt before. He always kind of evades. He kind of he ran away against a lot of the guys. If anybody's got any kind of shows any kind of threat, he kind of comes in and bounces around and moves around a lot, throwing some kicks. He's going to try to stay away. He's going to try to stay away from me, and I'm going to slowly and methodically and surgically walk him down until his heart rate gets so high that the lactic acid sets in. He starts second guessing himself. He's going to be on his back foot. His back is going to be close to the cage. And I'm going to land a right hand or a left hook and put his lights out within the first couple rounds.
Boom. Can't wait to see it, man.
Yes,
7
sir.
weeks away. We'll see you in Miami. Thank you, Mike.
Yes, sir. Thanks, Brett.